Because you don't believe it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So we're going to go where you refuse. So where the hell are the scholars on this? Like Paul's walking through Damascus. Don't you think someone would have added it up and said, maybe we should teach the people about all the shit going on in Damascus? No.
I've been tossed around by every sleep in this town. Have you?
And Paul? Maybe that's a topic for your book. No one ever figured out maybe Baal-Hadad, Syria, Damascus, spiritual breach zone, King David, Elijah. Maybe add that up with Paul being on the road to Damascus. You don't see any connection there. Never wrote a book on that. No, we don't. We're just going to sit around and argue which letters of Paul are authentic and call ourselves controversial. Okay, guys, you keep fucking smoking that scholar shit. Keep smoking up, you guys. Keep kissing the priesthood's ass. We see you. We see you.
And I am just a monkey man. I'm glad you are.
And if they do expose Paul, they're bumbling idiots. And how that relates back to Jesus and the Davidic covenant. And they don't have the balls to say Jesus's patriarchal bloodline to David and the supernatural and earthly Davidic Abrahamic covenant passed through that bloodline has dick diddly shit to do with Paul and his Baal worship. They don't have the balls to say it, whether they know it or not. They won't say it. They won't even say Paul was possessed. They won't even talk to you about the possession on the road to Damascus or the possibility of it. Whether Paul's real or fake is where they focus. Well, Paul's real. Paul's not real. Paul's Simon Magus. Paul wrote this. Paul didn't write that. Paul wrote these letters. Paul didn't write those letters. Paul contradicts here. Paul contradicts there. Talk about the fact that it's in Damascus with Baal-Hadad. They're eating food sacrificed to idols and doing ritual sex magic. And that's what the church chose. Go there. And maybe that will reveal to you an alternative that has nothing to do with that. Just saying. I'm going to give an example with Michael Heiser. But we love Michael Heiser. What do you know? You think you're smarter than Michael Heiser? Nope. I don't think I'm smarter than Michael Heiser. I think I have more integrity than Michael Heiser. I will say that. You know why? He is an expert in those areas. And you're going to tell me that this genius of false God, Old Testament spiritual infrastructure magically somehow turns into a complete bumbling dipshit when it comes to Paul? He didn't notice the Syria, Damascus, David, Abraham, temple, cult, hooker, eating food to idols. He didn't notice any of that in Acts and how that sort of kind of matches the whole Damascus road thing in Syria with all of his ancient gods in the Old Testament. He didn't notice that. He just overlooked it. Don't worry. Paul harmonized it. That's what he says. You know what Jesus says about harmonizing, Dr. Heiser? He calls that the doctrine of Balaam. Balal and Balak, that's the spirit of compromise. with these pagan shit. And Jesus says, oh, I'll have their children suffer intensely. You don't think Dr. Heiser knew that? He's brilliant. But he missed the fact that Paul is on the road to Damascus in Syria? And suddenly he's talking to a Python priestess, talking about a thorn in his flesh, a messenger of Satan, and telling everybody it's okay to eat food in idol temples. And you don't think Michael Heiser knew better? He just suddenly turned stupid when he got to the New Testament? No. I don't think I'm smarter than Michael Heiser. I think Michael Heiser is smarter than me. So there's absolutely no explanation. It's like, well, Paul came along and everything's better now. 4th century Rome. Like, excuse me? No, I don't think I'm smarter than Michael Heiser. I think Michael Heiser's smarter than Michael Heiser.
I'm a flea bit a monkey, and all my friends are junkies. That's not really true.
Hi, and welcome to our Bible study channel.
Energy. Energy. You cannot fuck with this. Energy. You cannot fuck with this energy. Love the doodles in the session. All of those who are listening, don't miss the message, judging me. You cannot fuck with this energy. Energy.
These are videos that go pretty in depth. First thing you should probably do is pause and read our 12 rules for reading biblical text. And if you don't like the 12 rules or you don't understand the 12 rules, well, I don't have time to explain them all. Go back to the book that I wrote and uploaded on this channel, which takes you through the entire arc and how we made these quote unquote 12 rules as a framework of what we found after 7 years digging meticulously and carefully through the text. So if you're confused, go do that. If I refer back, well, that's probably because we actually post these things in order. So they're all done in series. And if you jump in at the middle of a series without any schema or background knowledge, and you get all pissed off, well, that's also not our problem. This is a group where we go line by line, scroll by scroll through the text. Warning, we are not language sensitive, so if you can't handle some cussing, it's not the place for you. We also do not endorse nor approve of pretty much any mainstream theology. So if you're looking for that, also definitely not the place for you. We do a video about the characters that we use in our Bible study series. And the reason we do this is sort of so that they can kind of get in your head. So we do have a video explaining why we chose the people we chose and how their sort of energy characteristics go along with the biblical characters to modernize it for people so they know what the heck we're reading. Clearly, the Roman Church was not doing their job and looking for the lost sheep of the reunited House of David. So that's what we're doing. Okay? We're taking that away from them because they screwed it up. The brilliant rabbis also down there in Babylon are also not looking for the lost sheep of the reunited kingdom of David. So you're not going to hear, let's follow Rome. And you're not going to hear, let's follow the rabbis. on this channel. Because, sorry, not sorry, but the Bible wasn't actually written for the corrupt Levitical priesthood post-Babylon and Persia to read it through their little janky books. And it also wasn't written to be read through the eyes of pagan 4th century church fathers. So we're not doing that either. You guys can both have a seat. Oddly enough, the Bible also wasn't written to be read through the eyes of some dumbass scholars with pieces of paper that say they're smarter than everyone, but have never seen a Davidic covenant in their life. Not written for them either. You know who it's written for? It's written for the reunited house of David, who are actually in covenant and are actually the sheep. That's who it's written for. That's why nobody else can understand what the heck's going on. What you are going to hear is what you're supposed to hear, which is, let's follow the king. And let's get started.
So, we are going to war.
I'm a cold Italian pizza. I'm gonna use a lemon squeezer. What you do?
And here we are. We are starting off our very first video in what's probably going to be a really, really long Paul's Paganism series. I want to explain a few things about this series before we dig in. If you are a new person watching, welcome. We're happy to have you. But this is a new series for everyone. Okay, so whether you're new or old, this isn't one of those series that we've had that we dug through in our learning curve over the past 7 years. This is something we put together just now. And we haven't done the whole entire series yet, so we don't necessarily know where it's going to take us, all the places it'll take us. So you're sort of seeing the creative auditing genius as we move here. Warning, if you've been with us for a long time and you've watched all of our series and you understand the book and you understand the premises laid out, the basic premises laid out, you shouldn't have too much trouble with this. But warning, if you're watching this video as a new watcher or listener and you haven't gotten through some of the older series that we put up, it's really, really important to stop here and just say, we do things in order, okay? So the purpose of this is really to look at our series goal overall. And we're going to really try hard not to go down too many rabbit holes and lose sight of this goal. But it's to study Paul's pagan references and why they matter. I think this is really important with the state of Christianity as it stands. It's a hot mess. And if you have seen any videos and my experience in the supernatural and how it relates directly back to the Christian institutionalized theological framework, you'll understand that a little bit better. I do recommend a few series that we dropped. It's sort of in our arc here. The latest thing we've done is we started Luke. So if you haven't watched the beginning of Luke, at least do that. And at least get our purpose for reading Luke under your belt, because we're reading it through a certain lens where, it was commissioned by James and goes out, Luke Acts, to Nero under Roman law, and the differences between Luke and Acts. So as we started to get into Luke and we really defined our terms and we got going and we got our Davidic seed line done and we talked about the Ephraim thing, and I kind of stopped, and I stopped cold. And I jumped in and I dropped a couple little, I call mini series, because we don't go terribly deep. It was just, our personal study and little things we pulled out. So you can kind of add those up and make those connections on your own. But I threw out the Meat Bio series and I threw out our history shorts to sort of give you, that overview. But I also recommend the baptism series to understand this. I recommend the eating food to idols pieces. The baptism series, Luke, definitely James series, particularly, I don't know if it's first episode or second episode, but one of them is kind of like the vocabulary breakdown. But I do a lot more in that than just vocabulary breakdown. We really get deep and talk about the difference between Davidic covenant kingdom and false kingdoms and what that means jurisdictionally. So that's a good thing to have under your belt. Also, the Ephraim piece and the bloodlines piece and why bloodlines are critical and important. The Israel versus Judah thing. I mean, there's a lot to keep in mind when we dig into this. So with that in mind, please go back and study those. And if you haven't, you might be pissed off or confused, and that's not our problem. We're doing the best we can here. So let's move on. So this is sort of, this isn't like scholar advanced, but it's definitely advanced for our channel. It pulls a whole lot of things together. So if you don't understand, go back. All right. But today's agenda, it's a really big agenda, you guys. I think I have 48 slides. I don't think I've ever done a video with 48 slides before, so I have no idea how long we're going to be here. But we're going to take just a glimpse, just a peek at this character named Baal-Hadad today. We're going to address Paul's critics because I think they're doing a crappy job, and I'm going to tell you why. We are going to look at the gospel, resurrection, and the 10 commandments through the lens of covenant clarity. And I think that, that really doesn't have too much to do with this series per se. But as we dig through this, we've mentioned the gospel of the kingdom that Jesus preached before and how that's radically different from institutionalized evolutionary theology. So we've touched on that before. We're going to review it today. We haven't touched on the institutionalized resurrection framework. That's a big one, okay? That is one of those cornerstones of Christianity that makes you Christian. And we weren't actually planning on addressing that at all until we got all the way through Luke and hit the resurrection story. But it comes up here and it's relevant. So I kind of like, oh my gosh, people are going to scream and freak out because we haven't really talked about this yet. So we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about it through a Davidic lens. Not too deep, but we're going to overview it for you. And we'll get deeper into that when we hit Luke. And we're also going to look at the 10 commandments. There's a very specific reason for that through this Davidic lens and covenant clarity. Then we're going to actually read Acts 9, verses 1 through 5, where we're going to sort of be grounded for quite a while, as you'll hopefully see today. And because, we read and audit the text, we go line by line, scroll by scroll. We're going to pause and ask ourselves, what's the setting? What are our characters? All those kinds of things. What's the political climate? What's the historical climate? What's the occult piece? Are there any redactions and edits? We're going through that process with you now. Because like I said, this is a new series for everyone. So the first place we're going to start is, why Syria? What is so important about the quote-unquote road to Damascus? And is that significant or is that irrelevant? Like, why wasn't it on the road to Jerusalem? Why wasn't it on the road to Egypt? Why wasn't it on the road to Babylon? Like, why Syria or Damascus? And is that important? Yes, it is. Sure is. Yep. So let's get started. We're going to take a little glimpse at our friend Baal-Hadad. Because he wasn't just a rival storm god. He was the ritual gatekeeper of, get your notebooks out, trance possession. Not kidding. Fertility cults and seasonal resurrection. So it was a cycle that was celebrated every year, celebrating the spring rains and rebirth. His worship completely saturated the entire Damascus region, and more. And it sort of created this vortex, this spiritual infrastructure over the centuries that mimicked this idea of divine override. And you're sort of going to see this flipping back and forth throughout the Bible if you view biblical stories through a covenant lens. Because remember, we learned many times, and particularly in our history shorts, gods are attached to the land. So there's a covenant in that land. And you'll see in the Bible what modern Syria flips from Davidic covenant authority, jurisdictional authority, to giving Damascus up to its gods, which is covenant breach. And it goes back and forth and back and forth and back and forth throughout the Bible. So if you can look at the Bible through the lens of, let's track what's going on in Syria and why this is important, you're going to see this handing off back and forth, this fighting for sovereignty between Davidic scroll holders and Baal. So Saul's light show in Acts 9 wasn't just this happy emotional footnote in the world of Christianity. This incident that they claim was his conversion was staged outside of a city that was built on Baal's bones. So we're going to look back at Syria, and then we're going to take these claims one at a time as we deep dive into Hadad. And those three claims are transpossession, fertility cults, and seasonal resurrection. Now, criticizing Paul's critics. Out there in the world, you can just type in to YouTube, Paul is false apostle, or, Saul of Tarsus is a liar, whatever. And you've got all these quote unquote influencers and studiers and channels and books and all kinds of scholars and all kinds of stuff out there. Talk about this hot topic of Paul. But they're getting stuck, and it drives me bananas. There's very few of these guys that I can listen to. And let's see why. They all have a reaction to Paul. And the top three that you'll see, at least from influencers and YouTube channels who delve into Paul, they go to legalism. Okay? And this is a mistake because they're chasing Babylonian rabbinic laws, and doing that completely misses the entire point of the Davidic covenant. The next thing they do is they we have to throw out Paul. So we have to throw out all of Christianity. So let's kind of do this new age, hippie, dippy, abstract Christ consciousness, oneness. The real Jesus was some freaking, hippie dippy master teacher. Bullshit. Okay, that's bullshit too. So it kind of takes this legalism and goes in the opposite direction. But it's reducing the Davidic kingdom to this abstract New Age theology and spirituality. And it's really ignoring the jurisdictional authority that we break down in that first one or two videos in that James series about false kingdoms, different kingdoms, astral kingdoms, New Age kingdoms, religious kingdoms, institutionalized kingdoms, earthly kingdoms, and how those work with and against that jurisdictional override of the supernatural Davidic kingdom and the earthly Davidic kingdom, for that matter. If enough people would figure it out, they won't. The book says they won't. Or some of them just, you get these Gnostic whatever channels, and they're hell-bent on proving all of it false. They lean towards atheism or Gnosticism, and they're rejecting Paul. They've latched onto Paul as the hole in the ship that's going to bring down the whole boat. And it will. And I argue that's being done on purpose. Paul being baked in is exactly the rug that they, the elites, if you will, the puppet masters, the top of the pyramid, are going to pull out from under Christianity. He's in there and they know he's there and they know he's false. And when they pull that rug on purpose, you're going to see Christianity fall. And you're going to see people spiritually bankrupt because they don't know about the Davidic covenant. So they're going to run to pseudo-Judaism Hebrew roots, or they're going to be so harmed spiritually and emotionally that they're going to turn from religion, and they're going to be just clay in the hands of, they're going to fold like a cheap lawn chair in a strong wind, and they're going to be clay in the hands of these nefarious ones at the top of politics and priesthood. But that's not the answer. Yes, Pauline theology should be torn down, but no one is talking about the alternative. And the alternative, I'm sorry, guys, isn't Hebrew rootsy crap. Okay? That's rabbinic, legalistic post-Babylon. You're just running from Rome to Babylon. We don't do that. Okay? The answer biblically is the Davidic covenant, but no one's heard of it, so they don't know what to do. So rejecting Paul doesn't mean rejecting the Davidic covenant, the son of David, King Jesus. And nobody's adding that up yet. Hopefully, 100th monkey theory, they will. So you can get a lot of good information from these scholars and these influencers and these channels out there. But if they have an incorrect focus, like let's expose Paul to take down Christianity, or let's expose Paul by running to rabbinic, legalistic, pseudo-Judaism, or let's, expose Paul by whatever they're doing, getting into this new age crap. Well, that's the incorrect focus. And if you have the incorrect focus, you're going to come to incorrect conclusions. And we'll visit this slide and add to it at the end of the presentation today. So a key takeaway for this is throwing out Paul has absolutely nothing to do with rejecting the Davidic covenant. As a matter of fact, throwing out Paul is your first step in rejecting the Davidic covenant. And I want to stop here and just mention that a lot of these guys that are exposing Paul don't have any supernatural worldview. So they're not understanding the pagan, occult, demonic, supernatural, astral realms and how that grid, that quantum grid, if you will, is impacted by all of Christianity following this guy. They're looking at it still through the Western Christian lens of, what do I have to do to get a ticket to heaven? What do I have to do to be saved? What is the real gospel of Jesus? I get that, and I get that. But it's still such an earthly focus. They are missing what that means on a spiritual, dimensional level of evil. And they're probably doing that because they've never had interaction with the spiritual or supernatural realm directly. Okay, so that's where they're falling down. But that's where the real danger is. Okay, the real danger isn't the Baptist church on the corner starting to lose the memberships. That's not the danger. The danger is people not knowing what to do when these demonic, psychopathic entities and their Christian priesthood are revealed. And people are left spiritually bankrupt and at risk for attack. That's the issue. Okay, but no one's talking about that on a soul level unless they go completely woo-woo new age, and that's not correct either. So this is really, really important to study and understand the occult and pagan underpinnings and what the spiritual consequences of that are. Not just let's go through and talk about all the times Paul contradicts Jesus, but what are the spiritual implications of that? And what is understanding the Davidic covenant? That's the alternative to that. And no one's going that deep. So we're going to attempt to a little bit in this series, at least. Because Jesus doesn't equal Paul. Done. There it is. Jesus and the Davidic covenant have nothing to do with Paul. Therefore, Pauline Christianity has nothing to do with Jesus, the son of David. Now, the other thing Paul's critics are sort of kind of doing, but we're going to lay it out here, so you might want to pause, take notes, or grab a screenshot. This is Paul's gospel versus Jesus's gospel. And no, they're not the same. Don't even try to pull that crap off. Paul's gospel is grace-based. A lot of them take it to the point of just believe. Your Hebrew roots guys who want to cling to Paul are going to go back and forth and say, no, that's not really what Paul, you just don't understand what Paul said. And they're going to show how Paul followed the law. Yeah, whatever. Paul followed the law when he was standing in front of the Jews, and Paul didn't follow the law when he was standing in front of the Gentiles. That's what it is, okay? He didn't do it. He didn't follow the law. That's not true. You don't understand. Go away. Go back and watch some of my other videos. But Jesus' gospel is covenant-based. His gospel is join the kingdom. The kingdom's here. The Davidic covenant is rolled out. Join the covenant. That's what it is. Paul teaches that Christ, quote unquote, this entity, this logos entity, eternal son thing named Christ, is in you. In you. He does this in Ephesus, amongst other places. That's not what Jesus teaches. Jesus teaches the kingdom's here. Christ embodying you like a possession is not the same message as the kingdom's here. Paul's gospel focuses on personal salvation and a ticket to heaven. Well, Jesus focuses on jurisdictional inheritance of the kingdom due to being in Davidic covenant. Paul's gospel equates spiritual maturity with emotional feelings. Oh, I'm embodied in the spirit because of how I feel. No. Jesus' gospel is about sovereign clarity and enforcing divine order. It's legal. It's jurisdictional. Don't give a shit how you feel. That's how it is. So Paul's gospel is emphasizing this grace, a sin sacrifice, human sacrifice for sin, personal belief, all these things. Jesus' gospel emphasizes covenant and jurisdiction with the opening of the Davidic kingdom done for everlasting life. That's what it is. It's not just a spiritual kingdom with people sitting up there on harps going to heaven, getting a ticket to heaven. It's a sovereign, jurisdictional, dimensional issue that we're dealing with here. We see this just looking at everybody else that's not Paul. The argument is, after the cross, the gospel changed. Okay? After Jesus was resurrected, now it's a whole new thing now. So Paul came to teach what Jesus' death on the cross meant. Because you can't listen to Jesus' gospel because it changed after the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross. That's the argument. That argument falls down if you literally read anyone else after the crucifixion except Paul, like James. Faith that works is dead. Covenant obedience is essential. Jude talks about contend for the original faith. Reject this distortions of this grace-based nonsense. Peter in Acts, repent and be baptized. There's no mention of just believe. Join the kingdom. He talks about Gentiles as he's standing over David's tomb as being part of the Davidic covenant. Like, hello, because they're Israel. It's a thing. The council in Acts 15, we've seen this ad nauseum, where James is enforcing Torah principles, but not legalistic rabbinic crap. People are still out there arguing about circumcision. James and Peter literally got rid of it in Acts 15. Go back and read that again. Okay? Like there's nothing terribly legalistic here in Acts 15. He's rejecting the Babylonian law from the janky-ass post-Babylon Pharisaical dudes that you could compare to today's rabbi, which is what all the Hebrew roots people are chasing. Just read Acts 15 700 times until you get it in your head, okay? James is talking to the Gentiles who are Israel, coming back into the Davidic covenant. And he's talking about Moses and the Ten Commandments, and he's talking about ritual, sacrifice, sex temples, blood rituals. Don't do that shit. Get off the pagan shit. And everyone is out there either running around doing the pagan shit or chasing after the Pharisees that Peter bitch slapped right before, like a paragraph before that. It's banana town. It's bananas. James was not telling people to go chase the rabbis and figure out the 57 million laws because the Torah. That's not what it was. And I don't know how people are getting confused. They're running back and forth from Rome to Babylon, and they're missing the Davidic covenant that's standing right in the middle of it all. So the gospel didn't morph after Jesus died on the cross. Okay? James, Jude, Peter, all the guys, they upheld this covenant daily. And they did it with clarity, not some mystical Greek-Roman grace-framed sin atonement sacrifice BS. So let's look at the resurrection. This ruffles feathers. But the misconception is that this is part of this rebirth cycle. But the resurrection, guys, it's not a seasonal or agricultural cycle. It's a reversal of Adamic death, period. It involves human sacrifice. Sorry, not sorry, but Jesus is the Passover lamb, not the Levitical lamb. You guys are mixing your metaphors. Passover lamb has to do with dead and then not dead. That's what it is. It's like being passed over for death. So if you're in the kingdom with eternal life, that means you're not dead. You're alive in the kingdom. This isn't an atonement sacrifice. That would be the Babylonian Levitical priesthood lamb. They're two different lambs. If you want the Levitical lamb, go ahead and do the atonement sacrifice thing. But the Passover lamb was not about atonement. People don't get that. Take the human sacrifice thing off the table. It's ridiculous. You're literally worshiping human sacrifice. How can human sacrifice in the Levitical lens be remotely the action of Jesus's Father? I'm going to beat the shit out of not just a human, but my human son, my firstborn. Because humanity sucks. That's Babylonian Levitical sacrifice, dude. It's like, well, the cow wasn't good enough. Let's do a human sacrifice. Like, the dudes in the temples in South America and the sun god people and all the fucking Moloch people. Are you kidding me? Passover lamb and Levitical lamb aren't the same. We've got this ritual death and rebirth, but resurrection, it's not about ritual reenactment and going to the underworld and coming out. It's a one-time event. Jesus says, I'm a badass. I'm laying down my life so that I can take it up again. Because you can't open the Davidic kingdom of eternal life if you don't die and reverse the Adamic contract at the garden. Dead? Not dead. Jesus did it. There it is. And, this other thing about the resurrection is, well, if you just believe in it. But the Davidic kingdom doesn't operate on belief. You're not going to show up in the astral, dimensional, quantum realm when you die, and your soul's like, hey, dude standing at the gate of random astral kingdom, and he's going to have a little checklist. Hi, if you want to get into the Davidic kingdom, I got to check your beliefs. That's not what it is. It's not jurisdictional authority. Okay? Not can you convince yourself that this is true. Paul's the only one that talked about resurrection in this framework. And we'll show you that as we move through. So it's not about belief, ritual, rebirth. It's not about atonement. It's not even about atonement or human sacrifice. It's about reversing Adamic death and opening the Davidic kingdom for business. That's what it is. Let's take a look at our commandments now. Because I asked myself, how does this Hadad worship, this Pauline worship, this theory, this theology, institutionalized theology that came to us from the dude walking in Syria? How does these fertility cults under this God and others get us? How does Pauline theology get Christians to break the commandments? Well, of course, we've got the idolatry, no other gods, no graven images, throw that all in there. You're worshiping these false gods through rituals and false holidays. We're using idol statues and symbols in Baal's cult. We're eating food sacrificed to those idols while Paul says it's okay. And, that may look like a scholarly contradiction for text editors, and it is. But if you don't know the supernatural realm exists, or you don't accept that the supernatural realm exists, you're missing the spiritual, soul level consequences of idolatry. Don't know what those are? Go watch my other videos, because it's a bitch. Don't misuse God's name. If you're thinking that Jesus' father is Paul's God, you got another thing coming. You're attributing all of your theology to Jesus' dad and Team David. It ain't him. So you're misusing that name. And if you think it's Yahweh because you trust the Babylonian rabbis, you better hope that's the right name of God. Well, I am means Yahweh. Really? Are you sure about that? Or is that what the rabbis told you? We touch on that very, very briefly back in our shorts. Go find that. You better be sure it's the name you're calling. Keeping the Sabbath holy. Yeah, well, there's a complete disregard for God's appointed times in favor of Baal's festivals. And I would argue it would take a study so deep to even find God's appointed times now, because the calendars have been so jacked off. Honor your parents. Well, this is all undermined by the fertility cults and having the sex, that's ritual sex magic and all the seed mixing with the hookers. But even that lens is too shallow. Because when you think of honor your mother and father, people think of it as like, be nice to your grandma or something. But when you start looking at it through Davidic covenant and looking at it through bloodline inheritance, it becomes a whole other thing. So it's not just sexual impurity, but it's also working against your own sperm and egg. And an inheritance went through bloodlines. So when you're contaminating your bloodlines, and I don't mean this as like a ethnic racial thing. I just mean, you're spreading your seed and your hoochie out to all of these strangers in these sex cult rituals. What does that do to your bloodline, your spiritual DNA, your physical DNA, and all of those inheritances? I mean, we've got baby daddies running rampant. How the hell are you going to pass down inheritances when your family's that screwed off? And we wonder why we don't have generational wealth. Don't murder. Well, throw that out the window because we've got human sacrifice and ritual killings. exploitation and manipulation in that economic system, in the priesthood, getting rich and working with politicians, stealing wages. I mean, Jesus flipped the tables for a reason. They had built a whole economic system of robbery and corruption, working with the politicians and financially harming the people. Don't bear false witness. Deception and false prophecy in the wrong God's name. So you're not just bearing false witness against your neighbor. You're bearing false witness against God, which goes right back up with number 3. And don't covet. Well, greed and materialism abound, encouraged by these promises of prosperity and fertility. So, yeah, we've got 10 commandment breaches all over the place with this one. But now we've kind of laid those 3 big ones out. Let's move on to reading Acts 9, just this, verses 1 through 5. And I've got the Catholic public domain version up, and there's a reason for that. Now, Saul, still breathing threats and beatings against the disciples of the Lord, went to the high priest, and he petitioned him for letters to the synagogues in Damascus, so that if he found any men or women belonging to this way, or followers of Jesus, he could lead them as prisoners to Jerusalem. And as he made the journey, it happened that he was approaching Damascus, and suddenly a light from heaven shone around him. And he said, "Who are you, Lord?" And "I'm Jesus, whom you're persecuting. It is hard for you to kick against the goads," or the pricks. And we're going to read another version. And Saul, still breathing out threatening and slaughter against the disciples of the Lord, went to the chief priest and asked of him letters to Damascus for the synagogues, that if you should find any who were of this persuasion, either men or women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. And as he journeyed, he came near Damascus, and suddenly there shone round about him a light from heaven. And when he had fallen to the earth, he heard a voice saying to him, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" And he answered, "Who are you, Lord?" And the Lord said, "I'm Jesus, whom you persecute." And everyone just goes, "Yeah, Paul met Jesus." But they know nothing about this paragraph, the characters, the warnings, the occult pieces, and the settings. So we're going to start there. And why looking closely at the setting matters. If you don't understand Syria and the role of Damascus as this sort of vortex, spiritual vacuum zone, I don't know how you can possibly look at Paul's mission in this region with complete historical and spiritual ignorance. Because this place is significant, and it's significant throughout history, the occult, and the Bible. So we're going to try to tie up some of those pieces now. But I want to kind of talk about for a minute, what do I mean by spiritual vacuum zone? I want you to think of politics and think of Middle Eastern politics, right? USA goes in there on behalf of Israel and takes out a world leader, right? Saddam Hussein, Gaddafi, pick one. And what you get very soon is a political vacuum. And then all the bad guys in the region with all the guns and the money sort of have a race to the top to see who's going to be next. And generally, the people who have the money and the backing and the supporting aren't the good guys. They're the bad guys. So the bad guys go all the little towns and they threaten everybody and they get their political connections and they do dirty deeds to make sure they're on the ballot and everyone's voting for them. And this is how you get dictators that are horrid in play. When you're in a really bad neighborhood out in the Middle East, generally you want a very strong ruler who's also a badass against the threats because you're in a bad neighborhood. Make sense? You're not looking for necessarily quote unquote democracy, because democracy out there, after the number that the CIA, Mossad, all these guys have done on building up these terror cells, democracy ain't going to work when the psychopath lunatics who are brainwashed with have all the guns and the money and the power and the backing from these proxy wars. Like, who the hell do you think is going to win the election? Like some nice guy who wants peace? So you've got this power vacuum and the wrong people step in. And when I say wrong people, Americans might not see them as the wrong people, but Americans aren't freaking living there either. Does that make sense? So think of that as like that power vacuum. Well, Damascus was a spiritual vacuum where all these entities would go in and vie for control because it wasn't under jurisdictional covenant, or it was waffling back and forth and flip-flopping between Davidic covenant and no jurisdiction, Davidic covenant and no jurisdiction. And when it flip-flops between hands, well, you get a spiritual vacuum. Now, Hadad's worship saturated this whole region. And we say Syria because, you know, it's a modern nation state and we think of those borders. But I mean, this is Lebanon. This is parts of Turkey. Like, it's bigger. Go back to our history shorts. And just, you know, it's this whole upper region that is above what we think now of as Israel, Lebanon area. So go north of that. But you also have to go really north into Turkey. And you've also got to go really towards the east as well. And it was so saturated that it creates this spiritual infrastructure, if you will. And it's mimicking divine override. The enemy mimics. The enemy inverts. It's important to remember that through this series. So the first thing I want to do to show this premise that Hadad's worship saturated this region with this spiritual infrastructure, well, let's look at the political overlap first and get that out of the way. So we've got geographic saturation. And this comes, we talked about this in our history shorts, because, you know, this whole region and area is a melting pot of Egyptian, Greek, Roman, Persian, Canaanite, Babylonian, all these other influences that are going on in this region at the time, and more, and more. So we've got this overlap from all of these empires constantly changing hands. We've talked about that before. And we've got these empires overlaying one another. So the Egyptian empire takes over, the Assyrian empire takes over, the Greek empire takes over, you know, Babylonians are in there. So you've got all these empires taking over, but it's just the same land that keeps changing hands. And so this convergence kind of creates this bubble of all of these shared attributes among the false gods that are being imported and exported and shared and culturally assimilated over millennia. And it's amplifying the spiritual breach and the spiritual chaos. Okay. I want you to think about walking into a haunted house. All right. And they're like, oh, they opened some portal in my house and now like shit's flying off the walls. Like go watch a session on like HGTV or whatever about like paranormal TV. And like they opened a portal in the fucking basement of my house. All right. Well, imagine the entire freaking region with like portals on top of each other with all kinds of shit going on. Welcome to Syria. That's where we're at. Okay. It's amplifying the noise and the volume of this spiritual entity chaos because of all the rituals that are going on. And this isn't changing, and I don't know why. There we go. So let's look at the geographic saturation first. And I want you to kind of think of this Syria area as Baal's nexus, where it all comes together. We've got high places. Now, high places are generally these temples, areas of sacrifice. They're going to the high mountains to try to get as close to God as possible. And these temples were everywhere in Damascus, Aleppo, and all the surrounding regions for Hadad. Modern archaeological finds confirm all these altars, inscriptions, and ritual chambers are tied to Hadad worship. We've got our Syrian trade routes we talked about with the sea people and the Phoenicians and all this stuff going on the coast up there by Lebanon and the corner of Turkey where it comes down to Syria and Lebanon. So Damascus was this giant hub. It was one of those big cities we talked about in the history shorts for trade, culture, religious exchange, new ideas, new worship. And also for Hadad hustling and spreading his influence all across Mesopotamia and the Levant. So this cult would adapt itself to local cultures, languages, local variations, creating this sort of unified hub, but it was also diverse based on all the different people. Because you think Hadad cares what you call him. Or it's like, well, it's a storm god. Well, it's a lightning god. Well, it's thunder. Well, it's rain. Well, like, you think he cares which one? He's like, sure, I'll be all of it. Kind of like Saul. I'll be all things to all people. Remember when Paul said that? What you need me to be, I'll be. To win you over. Welcome to Hadad. So to kind of sum up that one, if we're looking at Damascus as his saturation point, yes, Damascus wasn't just some random city. It was Hadad's spiritual headquarters. It blended ritual, sacrifice, false worship saturation with cultural diffusion. That was that was like the headquarters. And taking a look at number 2 of our empire overlays of Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, and on and on and on and on. We've got parallels in Egypt. This mirrors Set. We talked about him in our Baal series when we talked about the Eye of Horus and the story and linked to chaos and fertility. These Egyptian texts, ancient Egyptian texts, they reference this ritual possession and seasonal fertility cycles that mirror this type of worship. In Assyrian and Babylon, we've got this same cult absorbing these elements of both Ishtar and Marduk, creating hybrid rituals. Go back and see our Baal series. We talked about this. It's all the same. We had Assyrian kings from the Assyrian Empire invoking Hadad in military campaigns and fertility rites. Now, they took the name Hadad out, but we're going to show as this series moves forward that quote-unquote Baal or Baal or Baal or Baal, Baal is how they say it, but I say Baal. Baal is, it's Hadad through the Bible. That's the archenemy. They took that name out, but that's who Elijah fought. That's who David was fighting. That's who Elijah was dealing with. This is who Ephraim teamed up with. Okay, it's Hadad. It's not just Baal. It's not just a random Baal. Okay, this is the archenemy of God, and this will get pulled out as we go. But when you're seeing me not use the name Hadad, the Bible doesn't always use that name, but we're going to show you that it was the guy. It was the number 1 archenemy. And we'll get there as we go. And then we've got Persian, who's adopting this god. And under Persian rule, this cult was merged with both Zoroastrianism and Mithraic practices. And they have that same seasonal resurrection, that underworld coming back up. Go see the Baal series. Eye of Horus, Eye of Set, all that underworld sun god worship stuff, all coming right here seasonally through this. And it's blending that legacy with their idea of Persian cosmology. So it's all linked, guys. This cult wasn't just a static one thing, even though the gods are attached to the land. It doesn't mean that they're not vying for jurisdiction, worship, and practice in other places. So it's evolving through these empire overlays, blending of spiritual chaos and these dimensional doors opening, fertility, ritual possession, into all of these hybrid systems that are running rampant across ancient Mesopotamia. So his worship was saturating this region, But like the headquarters, like I said, was right there in Syria. So now let's look at the biblical breach zones and some of the prophecy around Damascus. We've got the famous prophecy against Damascus, but they're like, oh, it's going to be bombed with like a physical bomb from the Rothschilds. That's how your evangelicals want to read the Bible prophecy about Damascus, but it's condemning the spiritual infrastructure in Damascus in Isaiah 17. Jeremiah talks about the judgment on Syria and their ritual high places, or these ritual sacrifice temples, and it's targeting these cult centers. And Amos is talking about Damascus being punished for mimicry and covenant breaches. So we're not going to go deep into those today. I'm just giving you an overview of everything we're doing. And this is just the setting. So if already you don't have all of this background knowledge as a Christian, and you're sitting in church reading Acts 9, and like, yeah, Paul was converted on the road to Damascus. And Damascus isn't like ding, 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 ding. What? It's because you don't have the background knowledge about the occult in Syria, and all this stuff isn't being given to you. And we're going to keep going, and we're going to dig this out. Setting is important, guys. Setting is important. And your preachers, I get so pissed they're not teaching this to you. I'm so pissed. So when we think of the prophecies, the prophetic spiritual vacuum, this saturation wasn't just geographic from these movements of empires and cultural diffusion. It was spiritual infrastructure that was set up for millennia, thousands of years. We've also got Syria, quote unquote, as a covenant battleground. And this is God versus his archenemy Hadad. This is where Abraham's birthplace and first migration is of the people, with Noah's Ark and coming down, and the literal birthplace of Abraham the patriarch. Same area where he got pulled out of this ritual worship and taken under God's wing. This is where it began. Same area. So his covenant journey with God begins in Syria. This area of quote unquote Aram, which is what it's called in the Bible, is like the jumping off point of all of the divine inheritance for God's children. So this is the zone where it all started. So it's also the zone that's going to be most hotly fought for and contested. This is like the border. Think of modern political borders. They're always a hot zone. Well, this is where it started. So this is exactly where God's archenemy wants to reclaim territory. And you're going to see all of this beginning with Abraham in Genesis 11, 12, and even 24, and lots of other places. David, I love King David. David's got issues. David's got issues in Damascus or in Syria, Aram. He's got victories establishing covenant authority. So he goes in there and he puts it under God's jurisdiction. But we have a rebellion against Solomon, that little bastard. And this is rooted in Aramean opposition. But if people don't know that Aram is Syria, they don't get it. They're missing it. So we're going to look at some of David's battles and how he's taking territory and claiming it for God in that covenant, the Davidic seed. Hello, ding, ding, patriarchal seed, Davidic covenant, Abrahamic covenant, running through that bloodline. Hello, ding, ding, go back, right? He's establishing this area as Davidic covenant jurisdiction. And then it gets reversed with Solomon. There's a rebellion. And he's lamenting over all of these military struggles in the north of Aram. So his conquest of Damascus, it's not just some piddly-ass little military battle, just another battle of David. This was a covenant override of Hadad-Bahadad's infrastructure. People don't see it that way. They see it as just another battle with a bunch of weird names. Well, we're going to take a look and dig down into that in David's struggles and successes in this very same region. But that's not all. That's not all. Elijah has issues with our Damascus, Syria area, spiritual vacuum up there. He's got a confrontation with Baal's prophets on Mount Carmel. And he's like, what? You got out taking a shit, calling fire down from heaven, doing all this stuff? His encounter with God at Mount Horeb was reaffirming his divine authority. Now, Mount Horeb is not in the Syria area, okay, Mount Carmel. I'm just letting you know that Hadad is the Baal that Elijah was confronting. Okay, they're the same guy. So when Elijah's fighting, he's dealing with Hadad's prophets, not just some random lord. Okay, and he's got his judgment against, I can't say this name, you guys, Ahaziah, for seeking Beelzebub. And we're going to see how Beelzebub and Hadad sort of go together. And we did that a little bit back in our Baal series, but we'll refer back to that when we dig out deep in 2 Kings with Elijah. So his journey actually ends in the Syria wilderness, where he's commissioned to dismantle the regime of Baal through prophetic succession. Did you know that? That his journey ends in the wilderness in Syria. People don't know. It's a hot zone, guys, constantly flipping back and forth between Davidic covenant jurisdiction and Baal covenant breach. We've also got Elijah with Aram. And this is also in 2 Kings, his confrontation with the army, showcasing God's divine intervention. His prophecy about Hazael's rise to power in Syria shows you that God can actively protect his people, his covenant people, even behind enemy lines. And even when their enemies seem overwhelmingly superior. If you're under covenant, land of Baal doesn't scare you at all. Paul wasn't under covenant when he wandered into that area. So we've got Ephraim's war, because it doesn't stop there. We see the Syria-Ephraimite war and God's promise to protect Judah. Well, why is God promising to protect the kingdom of Judah? Because we're having a civil war. And we'll talk about how Ephraim, northern tribes, northern kingdom, sort of sided up with the Syrian dudes to attack Judah. It's a good one. Yes, indeed. And in Hosea, we see that Ephraim's reliance on foreign allies led to spiritual breaches. Gee, some of our Hebrew rooters are out there talking about USA being Ephraim in modern political times. And do you think they're making any spiritual breaches by maybe siding up with the wrong entities throughout their religious systems and showing foreign allegiance to a nation run by Satan Yahoo just because it's called Israel? You think maybe that? Or pretending to be Judah, but it's not Judah? You think there's going to be any spiritual consequences to any of that? Just asking. So Ephraim's alliance with Syria and this false god worship, it's marking a huge breach event for northern Israel. It's ritual mimicry, political rebellion against Davidic covenant and covenant order. And this is the same freaking thing that Ephraim's doing today, with both chasing the fake Judah rabbis and with Rome, because Rome glamorized Baal, and because of Paul, and so all of Christianity is doing exactly Ephraim's mistake today. And I wonder what the consequences of that, spiritually and politically, are going to be. So key takeaway here, what I really want you guys to focus is this. I want you to give you a minute to read this. Oh, come on. Where'd you go? Just think about this, please. You can't read Acts 9 and hear Well, Paul met him on the road to Damascus. And if Damascus isn't ringing alarm bells in your brain, you are not literate enough to understand Paul in a biblical setting, period. And so we're going to get literate. And I'm not claiming that I'm the most literate either. I'm just saying, if we don't study this out and audit this and enhance our understanding and ask some questions, how do we know? How do we know what we're following and what we're doing? Because Syria, Aram, that land is literally the land of God's archenemy. So we need to audit this, and we need to understand that and understand some of the history and why it's such a danger zone when Paul goes wandering in there. Okay? And that's what we're going to do. We're going to try to get all of our knowledge I'm learning right along with you to really understand this area. We've already got modern archaeological stuff going on, and it does allude to fertility cults and sex magic. And I'm just going to quickly whip through these. We've got the Temple of Baal and Palmyra, and we talked about the Temple of Baal and Palmyra in our, I don't know, Meet Baal series, I think. It's there, where our politicians literally made a 3D replica of it and like trotted it around the world and put it right in front of Congress, and we're really proud of it. Yeah, there's that. We talked about that one. Excavated remains of Palmyra show not only ritual chambers, but fertility symbols, altars. They show, this is the part, guys. You know, the parade, the processions that we talked about in our Baal series. Dancing, ecstatic rituals, cult temple prostitute hookers, all of it standard practice. We've also got his consort, usually Ashtart and Anat. And we talked about the girls in our Meet Baal series, so we're going to dig down there a little more. And these guys are blood, sacrifice, and sexual magic, sexual rituals. We've got Baalbek, which is a Roman-era temple built over the old worship site. Well, it's going to be really fun when we learn about that one. That's really disgusting. And Christians, shame on you, Catholics. We're going to talk about this one. And it's also known for their trance rituals, festivals, and resurrection ceremonies. Oh, well, isn't that nice? In a trance, like, man, I don't know, can't see, hearing shit that no one else is hearing, seeing shit no one else is seeing, being caught up to the third heaven, just saying. We got Ugarit artifacts that talk about this Baal cycle. These go all the way back to 1400 BC. And then we see them with this thunderbolt and this silver gold statuette. We've got our same rituals of resurrection, storm invocation, and those darn sexual fertility rites, that sex magic in those temples. I'm telling you guys, it's a thing. Now, you have to understand a little bit about this Hadad cycle. Okay, it's called the Baal cycle. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but we may look at it a little bit because Hadad is battling Yam and Mot, and his job is to restore cosmic order. So we've got these other gods, okay, that come into play here and what that means. And, you know, Yam is I'm just going to quickly, way too quickly summarize. But Yam is the god of the sea, if you will, which we know from studying Leviathan and all of our sea references, that's chaos, right? The sea, the waters represent chaos. So he's defeating chaos to bring order. And I know that we talk about the sea, the water as chaos metaphor thing in our David Psalm series, but I haven't finished putting all those up yet. So that one might not be out on the channel. But so that kind of is a reminder for me to get back to that Psalm series and make sure we get through all of those so you can get these references a little more clearly. And also Mot, who is, you can sort of think of like the god of death, if you will, in the underworld. And so he's got to defeat Mot to restore this cosmic order and make order out of chaos. And defeat death. But unfortunately, we don't actually defeat death for good. We have to go back to the underworld every year, seasonally, and do these ecstatic celebrations, rituals, holidays to re-celebrate this defeating of death every single year. And there are rituals and slaughter that are associated with that. All right, we've also got our Aleppo Citadel, and that is a full-on temple to Hadad, and it features all kinds of stone and carved relics. It shows rituals of animal sacrifice, mountaintop worship, weather storm god shit. It's one of the oldest continuously used temples to Hadad, also known as Ada. We've got Ebla, which mentions the Temple of Hadad. And this is a mid-3rd millennium BC. Goes all the way back. So we're going back thousands of years. This is an infrastructure, guys. This is a thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of year old infrastructure. Going back through the Iron Age, back through the Bronze Age, into the Stone Age that we talked about in our history series. And it's all referencing this worship, temple placement, rituals, fertility cults, blood rituals to Hadad worship and temple placement. So once you understand this, now go read Acts 15, where James is like, don't be drinking blood, don't be doing janky shit, stay away from the fucking meat, don't be banging hookers in the temple, sexual purity. It's all talking to this ritual idolatry happening in these temples. And I know you've heard me say that before, but when you see it like this, and it's just one after the other, after the other, after the other, sex, killing, blood, sex, killing, blood, resurrection cycle, sun god raising up from the ashes, put it together with the Eye of Horus. And you see this pattern constantly, not only all over the world, but all over Syria. Human sacrifice. All right, we've got this Damascus Temple of Hadad. We talked about this, how it became the Roman temple. Well, yeah, this is a fun one. And then it became a mosque. It's had religious continuity from Hadad all the way to Islamic worship. And it's a site of ancient altars. We've got of the Chaldees. This is over in Iraq, which isn't really there, but this is arguably the traditional birthplace of Abraham. We've got the ziggurat of the moon god. And how this kind of layers into this, even though it's way over in Iraq, is supposedly this is where Abraham was called out of this moon worship and brought into quote unquote Yahweh's covenant. We've discussed how I don't trust the name Yahweh, and we've discussed that many times. If you don't know why, well, I don't have time to explain it now, but I don't use the name Yahweh, nor Jehovah, nor anything else in dealing with God, because I don't trust the rabbis, I don't trust the scholars, and I don't trust the Christian priesthood to tell me what God's name is. Jesus never called God a name. Jesus called God his Father. And, well, it means I am. You think so? In what language? Well, Hebrew. Oh, modern Hebrew or ancient Phoenician that they call Hebrew. It's just a Phoenician dialect. So how do you know? How do you know what those vowels really are? You're going to trust the Masoretic rabbis? I wouldn't if I were you. I would put my money on those guys. No, I wouldn't trust the Masoretic rabbis with what those vowels are. I also wouldn't trust that necessarily when God came around and said, I am what I am, that I am, whatever, the I am thing. Well, that's his name. Really? How very un-Shakespearean of you. To be or not to be? That is the question. Well, his name is to be. Really? That's a name? Or is that a cosmic spiritual declaration of jurisdiction and sovereignty? We'll answer that question in another series when we play the name games a little deeper. But I wouldn't be so sure that it's a name. I will tell you that in ancient occult, invoking the name, quote unquote, got you all kinds of weird shit happening, like Solomonic magic uses the name, which is another reason I don't play the name game. But that's what the scholars say. They say Yahweh's covenant. I say, not necessarily Jesus' covenant. This is one of those flip points, those waffle points, where things are going back and forth, between God and his archenemy from the Sumerian priesthood to initiating into the scroll, which will eventually become the Abrahamic and Davidic covenant, passed down through Ephraim in Genesis 48 to David, and then through his patriarchal bloodline seed to Joseph in the New Testament and down to Jesus. This is where it all starts. Okay, we've got southeastern Turkey. Why is that important? Because southeastern Turkey is right on the border of modern Syria, so it's all still the same area. This is the alternative Abrahamic birthplace and where they stopped on this migration down from Noah's Ark. Okay, it's got an ancient city, ruins, ritual wells, and Aramaean inscriptions. Armenian and Aramaean, not the same. We've got Abraham's family roots in Aram, and it's another flip point between this ancestral idolatry and covenant obedience. We've got Mount Ararat in eastern Turkey, the possible resting place of Noah's Ark. It's a little north of here. So this alternative Abrahamic birthplace is just southwest of where they think they're excavating this boat-shaped formation with organic residue and internal corridors. Okay, so this is where it's a flip point. Cosmic breach, world destroyed, Noah's under covenant. So it shows that this covenant is being handed down all the way back. Okay. Also, the Garden of Eden, arguably, is up there in Syria, and I don't think that made my list. All right, we've also got our milk cart celly in Aleppo, all the way back to 9th century BC. This is an Aramaic inscription linking King Ben-Hadad to Melkart, which is also a variant of the name Baal-Hadad. And it's a political and religious fusion of Hadad worship. This guy shows up in 1st and 2nd Kings as a rival to Israel. And we have a stele that talks about that. We've got Hadad relics and sphinxes. What do you mean sphinxes? I thought the Sphinx was in Egypt. Yeah, they're also in Syria. Those darn sphinxes. I'm telling you, the overlap of political, empire, and religion. From the Bronze Age to the Hittite periods, we've got basalt sphinxes, lion statues, and thunderbolt carvings all throughout. And these were generally your temple guardians and symbolic power markers. You do think of them in Egypt, but they're also Babylon and Syria. And this is, showing this ritual breach zone, or this ritual zone of we've taken this zone back out of the hands of God and putting it into the hands of Hadad again. And so up goes our gates. Think of a gated community, if you will, today. Okay. This is a symbol that you've walked into a gated community, and who has jurisdiction behind those sphinxes and those guarded power structures. All right. What else do we have? Every site, archaeologically speaking, is a ledger. From Ur's moon ziggurat to Baal's thunder strike, God's grid was being flipped. And you see Davidic scroll versus Baal mimic all the way through. He wasn't just a storm god. Hadad codified this resurrection motif through seasonal, every year, repeated celebration cycles. This area, the grid, the supernatural grid, the dimensional grid, the quantum grid, the land earthly grid, was pulsing with the laws of this storm god. Like Paul's walking through Damascus, don't you think someone would have added it up and said, maybe we should teach the people about all the shit going on in Damascus? No. So why is he doing this? He doesn't just turn into an idiot when he opens the New Testament. Well, because his funding, his publishers, university, whole platform of fame and influence. And oh, the audience, the public, are financially and emotionally on a freaking dog leash to Roman Church orthodoxy. And if he dare mention it, all the boomers sitting in the freaking audience, sorry, boomers, are going to be like, oh, he doesn't like Paul. The evangelicals are going to be up in arms, shitting bricks and sweating and clutching their pearls. No one's going to buy his books. Oh, they're happy to read all the Old Testament supernatural mystical stuff that just suddenly somehow gets lost when it gets to Paul. But, I don't want to go too hard on Michael Heiser because we have more. These scholars are spending 500, 600, 700 pages just proving Baal was a storm god. Like, no shit, Sherlock. And then they get to Paul and and then Paul had a vision, so it's fine. Yes, that's not fucking scholarship. That's theological bullshit right there. So why does what I call this Pauline firewall, why does it hold? Because if you take on Paul, you take on a career risk. You're going to lose your platform, you're going to lose your publisher, or you're going to lose your tenure. You're going to lose your audience because all of Christianity and most biblical readers and all the preachers and priests need Paul. They don't just need Paul. They need Paul to be clean from Jesus, or the whole thing falls down. Paul is literally the theological keystone. And you know what? I shouldn't have written keystone. I should have wrote foundational stone. Or as Jesus says, cornerstone. Jesus says, I'm the stone you rejected. I'm the stone the stone builders rejected. Well, I wonder who the stone is that they accepted. This one, which is why the scholars won't touch it. If you pull Paul out, the entire cathedral collapses. And they have emotional avoidance. Because the existential breach of Pauline possession and contradiction, it's too much for them to fathom. So Paul's treated like a divine closer on Wall Street. No questions allowed. Wrap it up. Paul said so. Scholars avoid challenging him because they're protecting their money, their careers, their funding, their platform, their audience. They're lying to you because it's what you want to hear. Churchy people need Paul. So scholars comply. All the contradictions, all the paganisms, and all the occult are ignored and glossed over for theological unity. So your scholars, they might decode Old Testament gods for you, and they're accurate and often brilliant. They might acknowledge some kind of cosmic supernatural conflict. But then they reach Paul, and suddenly they comply. They go blind themselves. Paul was blinded on the road to Damascus. Well, guess what? So are all the freaking scholars. They're all blind too. Well, Paul fixed it. It's gross. It's really gross. But like I said, it's not just Michael Heiser. We've got N.T. Wright. We've got Tim Mackey from the Bible Project. He's a visual genius. But Paul somehow becomes the quote-unquote unifying thread of the Bible. Really? Really? Give me a break. Mr. Wright up here at the top, he harmonizes Paul with Jesus using duct tape, basically. Bart Ehrman, oh boy, does he annoy me. He's a very kind man. He's very kind. I like the way he's kind, but he's snarky. He's snarky too. He does. He's got a little snark with him. A little arrogance. That scholar. Seems like when you get a PhD, You literally can't function without a little bit of snark and arrogance. And I can like feel that, like he sweats that. He's condescending. I find him condescending. Kind, but condescending. So he drives me a little bananas listening to him. And he is the master, the literal master, and one of the most popular influencers about textual criticism and New Testament contradictions. But he's remarkably soft on Paul. He'll claim to expose Paul, but he thinks Paul was sincere and maybe just misconfused. Why aren't you looking at Damascus, dude? Why are you giving him a pass? And then he puts Jesus as like this failed apocalyptic prophet. Never viewing the Bible as a supernatural document where Paul is literally possessed and teaching wrong theology, and that implication to all of Christianity. He already gave up Christianity. Go all the way, Ehrman. But no, we're not going to talk about Paul in Syria, in eating food to idols, in demonic temples. We're leaving that alone. That's a little too harsh for his audience. And we never look at Jesus framed through the Davidic covenant. God forbid. We might hint at the virgin birth being false, but never, well, what's the implication of that, Bart? Well, then it would mean that Jesus maybe is a bloodline Davidic heir. Maybe we should look at the Bible through that lens. Nope. Can't go there. Can't go there. We've got John Dominic Crossan, who is co-founder of the Jesus Seminar, and he's really strong on historical Jesus. But Paul's letters, well, that's post-resurrection theology. Forget James, Peter, and Jude. Forget they even exist. And taught something completely opposite. No, maybe called the Davidic covenant, dipshit. So he does not expose Paul's BS rewrites at all. And, you know, Jesus is just a good ethical guy. He's an ethical teacher, not a tribal bloodline Davidic redeemer. No, not that. Mr. Maccabee, he claims Paul invented Christianity using Hellenistic myths. Well, there you go. Sort of, almost, kind of, but not really. I wouldn't say he invented it. It was there long before Paul. He used all of the false god worship in the temples and the psychopaths and the lunatics around him and slapped Jesus's name on it. But he didn't invent Christianity. He influenced it. He gave the dipshit preachers and priests everything they need to invent Christianity. But there was a world in the first century that had nothing to do with Paul. So which Christianity do you mean? And why aren't you looking at the other one? There's an assumption here. And you're leaving that big gap open without exploring the other alternative. You know why? Because he frames Jesus as a quote unquote Jewish reformer. Jewish. Now, we're going to see the problem with that word in this context with scholars, perhaps the next time. Because Jewish of the first century has nothing to do with Jewish today. And I'm going to argue Jesus wasn't Jewish. Because in the Old Testament, in the New Testament, Jewish didn't exist till post-Babylon. Jew is an English word that comes from people of Judah. It's a locational term. And then eventually it sort of kind of morphed into people who were loyal to the political and religious infrastructure of the corrupt Babylonian priesthood sacrificial temple system. Was Jesus loyal to the Levitical post-Babylon sacrificial temple system? I would say no. So you must be talking about him in a locational term. So why not be accurate? Why not say Jesus from Judea? Not Judah, Judea. And then explain what that is. Explain that Galilee is closer to Lebanon than it is to Jerusalem. And you can't do that because we have this modern Jewish matrix that we have to stick to. Don't talk about Ephraim and that bloodline. Don't point out that there were two houses. There's the house of Judah and the house of Israel. And Jesus was part of the house of Israel, born in Judah, not of Judah, because Ephraim got the Abrahamic covenant, Genesis 48. Why don't you talk about that? And all the prophets were talking to two different regions, two different people groups. Why don't you talk about that? So we expose Paul's breach, but no forensic rigor when it comes to the scroll and the covenant. So he's useful when he critiques these glamorized myths, but he's not in the covenant. He didn't know anything about the covenant or the Davidic covenant at all. Thomas Sheehan, another one. He critiques all the metaphysical overlays, and Paul is distorting Jesus into cosmic abstraction, blah, 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 blah. No idea. Again, never heard of a patriarchal lineage, bloodline covenant to David. He's just this existential figure. He's not the ruler of a kingdom or anything, because we got to protect our Jewish friends and pretend that Jew and Israel and Judah and Judea is a Hebrew, it all means the same. That's what we're doing. Michael Golder, Paul invented Christian doctrine. Yeah, not really. That was Rome using Paul to justify their bullshit. So, be a little more careful. But, Jesus is, again, a Jewish reformer, blah, blah, blah. There's the Jewish thing again. We've got Robert Eisman, and I've got an asterisk by him. He falls into trap number 2, which is our modern Jewish matrix. But he's pretty good. He frames Paul as a dude of lies, elevates James as a true leader, aligns Jesus with Essene-style righteousness, which I sort of disagree with Jesus Essene, and keeps Jesus, but, sort of leaves him outside of this institutionalized Christianity. So he's kind of adjacent, but from more of a historical and Jewish, modern Jewish matrix perspective, rather than an old world. Judah, Judea, Hebrew, Israel, and knowing the difference between those three, and in demystifying that language. If you don't know what I'm talking about, book, chapter 7, go there. James Tabor, oh gosh, this guy drives me bananas too, because he's trying to be so nice, because Christians run around clutching their pearls, and he wants to sell all his books. Nobody wants to buy your books unless you're a Christian. So I'm going to leave it up to you. Whatever, dude. So he frames Paul as sort of, this theological manipulator. He does highlight his argument with the original apostles. He's also glamored in this, trapped in this Jewish identity matrix. Completely avoids any kind of supernatural, tribal, Davidic covenant. Never frames Jesus as the king of a kingdom, as a Davidic jurisdictional heir in God's kingdom by reversing Adamic death. Can't get there. I don't know how these guys can't get there from here, but they can't, because that would be teaching the Davidic covenant, and they are not allowed to do that. You've got Robert Price. Oh, Jesus, this guy. Christ is a myth. He is just equating Jesus, David, the Davidic covenant, with everything's Paul. And Paul's wrong, so just throw the shit out. It was all made up. He's got no tribal mapping, no registry audit, no covenant, doesn't understand the Davidic covenant, deconstructs Pauline's bullshit as myth, and pretty much leaves it there and throws the baby out with the bathwater. Guys, they're a mess. I don't know how you can get through all of that and not get to Davidic covenant, Jesus bloodline. Don't know how you can get there. Forget sacrificial atonement, forget virgin birth. You get all this mythology, you get all these false gods, but you can't figure out that Paul was possessed in Damascus of all places. And you can't figure out the Davidic line covenant. It blows my mind. And then we've got my favorite asshole, Tobias Singer. If anyone's ever on Tobias' show making a comment, ask him that. This is the question that Tobias won't answer. He calls himself a rabbi, but he never mentions Judah versus Israel as being two separate people and two separate kingdoms and two separate places and two separate prophecies. All the prophets weren't talking to Jews. They were talking to Northern Kingdom Israel or Southern Kingdom Judah. You pretending that that doesn't exist, that's not Torah. That's bullshit. That's theater with fairy dust and glitter, Mr. Singer. So he'll challenge dipshit Christian missionaries who don't know anything, but he's challenging them with rabbinic tradition. Rabbi, the Bible wasn't written for you. You're post-Babylon. You're Levitical priesthood. You guys don't even have land. Never mind right to rule shit. And you wrote in all your janky laws with Ezra and your Babylonian priesthood remaining faithful to, let's think Persia, and then claiming to have these beautifully pure bloodlines from the Edomites and the fucking Herods. Really, Rabbi? Really? Really? Yeah, you're part of that Babylon that came in and ate Judah and stole their identity and is still lying about it today. Because you won't even tell your viewers that there's a difference between Judah and Israel. So I don't know what kind of rabbi you are. Either not a very good one or you're lying. So he's this charismatic critic of Paul, but he equates Jesus as Paul and Paul as Christianity. One of those. And Judaism is the answer to everything. We get everything now. We get all the prophets. We get all the Old Testament. We're David. We're Abraham. We're everything. We get everything because Judah versus Israel doesn't exist. No such thing. It's all about us. And it's all about us post-Babylon, 5th century Jewish, Persian priesthoods kissing the ass of their captors to this day. Refuses to discuss anything about the two-house theology of the Judah-Israel split, completely denies anything supernatural, and he's using the glamored political Jewish matrix jargon bullshit of today as if today's Jews have anything to do with the Bible. They don't. Well, it's the old Hebrew Bible. Phoenician. It's Phoenician. It has nothing to do with Masoretic text either, so you can go walk away with that as well. And they're just reinforcing this Babylonian construct post-captivity. Never codifies any bloodline implications or spiritual ones. So what you're watching, where are the scholars on this? You're watching PhD, theologically credentialed scholars doing spiritual malpractice. Oh, they'll write books and make hundreds of thousands of dollars decoding Bahadad, El, Yahweh, talk about all that, decode the language, look at the history, teach about the temples of the Old Testament, and all their ancient Near East cosmology with surgical precision. Then they hit the Pauline firewall. They get to Paul. And just like Paul, they all go blind. And they've got scales on their eyes, and they just can't see it. They all turn into bumbling fucking idiots and distraction specialists. Bumbling idiots when they get to Paul. And if they do expose Paul, they're bumbling idiots. And how that relates back to Jesus and the Davidic covenant. And they don't have the balls to say Jesus's patriarchal bloodline to David and the supernatural and earthly Davidic Abrahamic covenant passed through that bloodline has dick diddly shit to do with Paul and his Baal worship. They don't have the balls to say it, whether they know it or not. They won't say it. They won't even say Paul was possessed. They won't even talk to you about the possession on the road to Damascus or the possibility of it. Whether Paul's real or fake is where they focus. Well, Paul's real. Paul's not real. Paul's Simon Magus. Paul wrote this. Paul didn't write that. Paul wrote these letters. Paul didn't write those letters. Paul contradicts here. Paul contradicts there. Talk about the fact that it's in Damascus with Baal Hadad. They're eating food sacrificed to idols and doing ritual sex magic. And that's what the church chose. Go there. And maybe that will reveal to you an alternative that has nothing to do with that. Just saying. Can't do it. They try to do that. They hit the modern Jewish matrix. Well, Judah and Israel and he was all the same. Just all the same. There's not two kingdoms. Jesus can't possibly have a patriarchal bloodline to David and carry that covenant. That can't be. Even though we just proved all the mythology of the virgin birth, we're not going to go back and look at Jesus as a bloodline heir. Like it's absurd, you guys. The wall they hit when they get to Paul, they can't get around it. They suddenly go blind, just like Paul did in Damascus, because they're serving the same system. The priesthood doesn't die. What dies and changes over time is political parties, political empires, borders, land borders, political kingdoms, rulership. Those change. What doesn't change is the priesthood, the dark, evil, corrupt priesthood of all religions. That doesn't change. That is what they're afraid to speak out against, whether Jewish or Christian. They won't talk about that. They certainly won't talk about the Islamic priesthood. But no. They won't go against Rome and they won't go against the rabbis. They can't. So they get to a certain point, and then they all turn stupid, they all go blind, and they run you in circles. Don't look there. Paul fixed it. The Logos wins. What's the Logos? From the pagan Greek church fathers, really? The Hellenized Jews from Egypt? That's what you're going to Philo of Alexandria. Why aren't you teaching people about Philo of Alexandria? If Paul is such a genius and he fixed it with his vision, why aren't you telling people about Philo of Alexandria? Are you scholars too stupid that you don't know who Philo of Alexandria is? And that Paul was using his faulty and really shitty comparison? Preaching that all over town? You didn't get that? You guys missed that part? No one's ever written a book on Philo of Alexandria and his influence on Hellenized Jews? And Paul? Maybe that's a topic for your book. No one ever figured out maybe Baal Hadad, Syria, Damascus, spiritual breach zone, King David, Elijah. Maybe add that up with Paul being on the road to Damascus. You don't see any connection there. Never wrote a book on that. No, we don't. We're just going to sit around and argue which letters of Paul are authentic and call ourselves controversial. Okay, guys, you keep fucking smoking that scholar shit. Keep smoking up, you guys. Keep kissing the priesthood's ass. We see you. Don't look there. 4th century theology, Roman Empire. It's fine. Just do what Constantine said. It's okay. That's not scholarship, you guys. It's emotional leasing to institutional theology. So whether you claim to be agnostic or atheist or Christian or historical Jesus loving, you're full of shit. You know why you're full of shit? Because you're still married to the lies of institutional theology because you like your money. Sellouts and cowards, every one of you. At worst, and at best, you're just not in the Davidic covenant and you can't see it. You don't even know there's a such thing as the Davidic covenant. You just can't get there. Can't imagine it. That has nothing to do with Christianity. or Judaism for that matter. Never considered it. So you may get good information from these guys, but if their focus is incorrect, they're going to come to the incorrect conclusion. So we're going to add to the little chart we made at the beginning, where some people turn to legalism and they're chasing Babylon rabbinic nonsense and completely miss the point of the Davidic covenant. You will find these guys who make this mistake. They're very Jewish vocabulary centric. I mean, modern Jew uses the words Torah and Jewish without ever defining those words or understanding what they mean historically versus today. Never mind spiritually. You get oneness, Christ consciousness, New Agers that when they criticize Paul, well, they just reduce the kingdom to abstract spirituality, completely ignoring jurisdictional authority in this realm or the supernatural realm. Sometimes the supernatural realm is completely ignored. Just be nice. Just say nice things. Love, man. There's no jurisdiction out there in the astral woo-woo land. Just love, man. It's all you need. Yeah, okay. Clearly, you've never been astral kidnapped. Just saying, it shows. Gnosticism and atheism. Oh boy, do these guys love to be really scholarly and bash on Jesus and the covenant and David and all that. They love that. They love that. They love to equate Paul with Jesus so they can bash on Jesus. But rejecting Paul doesn't mean rejecting the Davidic covenant or the king. But it doesn't matter because they've erased the Davidic covenant, because they've erased the bloodline. So Jesus is a metaphor, not an error, and they can't understand it because they're trapped in fighting Pauline Christianity, not Davidic covenant Christianity. Got your Hebrew roots, guys. They rebrand Paul as Torah loyal. Right, okay. It included sacrifice to idols and sex hooker temples. Okay, guys. Sounds right. And they still think Jesus is Judah. Figure that out. Yeah, figure out the bloodline. Some of them have a refusal of the two-house theology. So they're ignoring the Israel-Judah split and Ephraim's restoration. Some of them don't. Some of them catch that. The Messianics don't. It's very, very Judah. They're chasing Judah. It's all about Judah, and Paul's loyal to the Torah, which is insane to think that. Your academic historians, they're going to frame Jesus as an ethical teacher. He's a good guy. And Paul was innovative. Sometimes it contradicted. The entire covenant and registry is erased. There's no tribal lineage. They don't talk about how the Jews from Babylon came back and jankified the books and fucked off Chronicles and all the genealogies and how those don't make sense. They might talk about it in the New Testament. They're not going to touch it in the Old Testament because their rabbis would give them a beatdown. The modern Jews would flip their shit if you suggest that Judah has nothing to fucking do with Jesus, except David was born in the region of Judah, but he was an Ephraimite, Ephrathah, Genesis 48. Read it. Rachel's sons, not Leah's, in Judah, not of bloodline Judah. They can't do that. Can't do it. The rabbis would flip their shit. We can't do that. Or we have progressive Christianity, which Jesus is a social justice icon. He's a hippie warrior. Yeah, that's what he does. So the kingdom is a metaphor. There's no covenant, no throne, no law, no jurisdiction. He's just sort of a beacon of happiness. He's whatever you want him to be. That's where we are. So why is it important to study Paul's paganism? Because I think it's more serious than that. And I can think of a few channels that are actually doing really good work on exposing Paul. But I don't think people who have occult, damaging trauma from the astral, from poltergeist activity, from the supernatural realm, those people don't know. The people who are studying Paul don't know the supernatural. They don't know first century occult, never mind today's occult. They don't understand the spiritual dimensional breach, the jurisdictional covenant that is being thrown out by the church following Paul. They don't understand that part because they don't understand the occult. They've likely never had shit flying around their house for 20 years from poltergeist activity. They've likely never seen satanic ritual abuse up close and personal. They've likely never considered, dead kids and dead dogs sacrificed in the woods in blood rituals. They've never equated it to child trafficking problems. They've never equated it to the priests and the priesthood addicted to porn and diddling kids. They're not making that spiritual moral connection. They're just sticking to the scholars and the books and he said, she said stuff. And they're not going deeper into spiritual and moral implications. Not only here with the ritual abuse and the satanic ritual abuse, then the physical idolatry amongst the priesthood, but they're definitely not taking it out to the astral because they don't know it and they don't understand that part. But when you've been astral kidnapped and have the shit beat out of you for 40 fucking years since your first memory, I can talk about the astral and sleep paralysis and poltergeist activity. I know that. Natural law. And sadly, most people talking in the spiritual warfare realm, they sort of understand the occult and satanic abuse and secret societies and cult worship and these kids that are getting sacrificed, either ritually blood or ritual sexual sacrifice. They're getting that. But then they point you back to Paul, who's the nexus of that practice. If Paul met Jesus, he wouldn't have taught the things he taught because they're pagan. And so I think it's important to make that connection for the audience. This isn't just about some scholar 200 years ago who also rejected Paul. This isn't just about, well, Jesus said this and Paul said that. This isn't just about let's expose the mythology that Pauline Christianity borrowed from. This is spiritual warfare and spiritual, legal, jurisdictional covenant warfare. And when you're focusing on the fog of he said, she said, you're missing it. And I've got people that I work with who are still being attacked in the astral and in sleep paralysis, and they don't know what to do because they're out there reading books and going to websites, and all the people who tell them how to stop it are pointing to Paul. And they're on the defense, they're not on the offense. They have not taken the Davidic covenant to the offensive mode because of Paul. Again, false contract. So I think if people don't understand the depth of Paul's paganisms, we're going to get to a dead end. And when they finally pull the plug on Paul and the whole church collapses, people are not going to have a spiritual alternative because even the scholars can't find a Davidic bloodline covenant to save their life or to save their soul. Never saw one. Read the whole Bible, studied the whole thing. Can't figure out Davidic seed, bloodline, Jesus covenant. Can't get there from here. And so people aren't learning this. They aren't learning that the Davidic scroll line covenant is very different than Hebrew roots, than Jewishness, than Christianity, than oneness, Christ consciousness. Like, they're not getting it. And not only is that incorrect, it's spiritually dangerous. It's supernaturally dangerous. You sit around with a growling wall, scholars, you might want to know how to get rid of that. You look around and see priests diddling and trafficking children. That's not enough for you to look into the occult and its ties to Paul in Syria, of all places. Blood rituals doesn't ring a bell, huh? Well, because you don't believe it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So we're going to go where you refuse.
Energy. cannot fuck with this energy. You cannot fuck with this energy.